Text of Zhang Ailing's short story Young Time Pan Ruliang had a bad temper when he was studying. He held a pencil in his hand and refused to be idle. He always drew little figures on the top of the book. He had never studied pictures and was not very interested in them. But when the pencil touched the paper, it bent, a curve, involuntarily drawing the silhouette of a face. Always that face, and always to the left. I have been accustomed to painting since I was a child, and I am very familiar with it. You can draw with your eyes closed, and you can draw with your left hand. The only difference is the right hand draws more rounded, while the left hand draws more jerky, with larger convex and concave angles, making it appear thinner. It is the profile of the same person after a serious illness. There was no hair, no eyebrows and eyes, and a very simple line from forehead to chin. But it was obvious that he was not Chinese. His nose was a little too protruding. Ruliang was a good, patriotic boy, but he didn't have much favorable impressions of Chinese people. The foreigners he knows are movie stars and handsome models in cigarette and soap commercials, while the Chinese he knows are his parents, brothers and sisters. His father is not a bad person, and he is out doing business all day long. He is rarely seen, but actually it is not annoying. But his father often sat alone in the living room after dinner, drinking and eating fried peanuts, until his face turned red and shiny, just like the owner of any small shop. His father ran a soy sauce garden and was also a shopkeeper. However, since he was his father, he should be an exception. Ruliang is not against drinking. A person who suffered a great blow, whether it was love or career, staggered into the bar while holding onto the wall, climbed up on a high stool, and screamed, "Whiskey, no soda." Then he held his hair with his hands and stood up. A lock of hair hung down and fell into his eyes. However, his eyes did not blink for a moment, staring blankly. This was natural and pitiable. Although drinking too much is not good, it is still a kind of noble obscenity. Like his father, he poured some warm wine from the tin pot into the teacup with the handle off. While drinking, he chatted with his mother, who was sitting next to her settling accounts. He said his, she said hers, each one said it. Don't offend each other. When I see the children showing greedy expressions, I sometimes give them peanuts to eat. As for the mother, she was naturally an uneducated poor person who sacrificed her life's happiness under the oppression of the old ethics. She was full of love for her son, but she could not understand him. She only knew how to get him some food and force him to eat. Go down. And then Zunran sends him out, the wind blowing her fluttering white hair. The hateful thing is, Ruliang's mother's hair is not white yet, and she likes to pull out 1 or 2 white hairs occasionally. When things go wrong, she doesn't cry. She only blames her children and makes them cry. In her free time, she listens to Shaoxing opera and plays mahjong. Ruliang's 2 older sisters were also studying in the university like him. They wore makeup, were not very beautiful, and refused to settle down. Ruliang doesn't want a woman like his sister. What he despises the most is the large group of younger siblings, dirty, tired, ignorant, and very childish children. It was all because of their existence that his parents and sisters often forgot. That Ruliang was already old and confused them as soon as he came. This was the first thing that made him sad. He never spoke at home. He is a lonely bystander. He looked at them coldly, and his excessive contempt and indifference made his eyes turn light blue. The color of the stones, the color of the figures on the morning frost. However, no one felt it. No one was ever disturbed by his critical attitude. He is not an important person. Ruliang is rarely at home all day long, after class. He went to a language training school to study German, partly because he was studying medicine and German was very helpful to him, and partly because he wanted to avoid having dinner at the same table as his family. The night school started at 7. It's 8:30, like now. It's not even 6:30, and he is already sitting in the student lounge, warming himself by the fire, reviewing his homework. There were several newspapers and magazines scattered on the long table in the lounge. There was a man sitting across from him, with the newspaper covering his face. Not students, even advanced students may not be able to read German newspapers. The fingernails on the newspaper were mottled with red cracks. Ru Liang knew that it must be the female typist in the principal's office. She put down the newspaper, turned to another page, folded the newspaper, and leaned on the table to read. There is a tangle of yellow curly hair hanging on the head, a fine tartan coat, and a green handkerchief in the pocket that rhymes with the green of the shirt. The shadow of the upper body happened to fall on the newspaper. She frowned and turned towards the light. Ru Liang was suddenly surprised when her face turned away. Her profile was the only profile he had drawn since childhood. It was the unmistakable line from her forehead to her chin. No wonder he felt a little familiar when he saw this Russian woman when he signed up. He never imagined that what he drew turned out to be the silhouette of a woman, and a beautiful woman at that. The distance between the mouth and nose is too short, which is said to be a symbol of short life. Ru Liang has never considered the cuteness of short-lived women. He just intuitively felt that there is a kind of childish beauty in people with a short philtrum. Her hair was too yellow to be strong, and it probably needed some sunlight to make it pure, like the golden color in the Madonna. Only because of the seemingly non-existent eyebrows and hair, the line on the side is particularly highlighted. He felt a strange joy in his heart, as if this person was entirely created by his hands. She is his. He couldn't say whether he liked her or not, because she was a part of him. It seemed that all he had to do was walk over and say, "It's you. You're mine. Don't you know?" Then, he could gently pinch off her head and put it in the book. He was stunned at her, and she seemed to feel it. Ru Liang quickly lowered his eyes to read. The drawings on the left and right on the top of the book were all in profile, but we couldn't let her see it, because she thought it was her. Liang Sheng hurriedly grabbed a pencil and started scribbling, but the rustling sound caught her attention. She leaned over and looked at his book, and said with a smile, "It's very similar, very similar." Ru Liang muttered and didn't know what he said, and the pen in his hand just painted on it as fast as the wind and rain, and it was blackened, half a book. She stretched out her hand to pull the book over and said with a smile, "Let me have a look, otherwise I wouldn't recognize my profile. I recently took a photo, and one of them showed half of my face, so I knew it was me as soon as I saw it. It's really good. Why not add the eyes and mouth?" Ru Liang couldn't help but explain that he couldn't draw the eyes and mouth, and he couldn't draw anything except the side. She glanced at him and saw the embarrassment on his face. She thought he was not good at speaking English and couldn't answer the questions, so she struck up a conversation and said, "It's really cold today. Did you come here on a bicycle?" Liang nodded and said, "Yes, yes. It will be even colder when we go back at night," she said. "It's really inconvenient to lead out Zhuang." "Which teacher is your teacher?" Liang said. "Schmidt." She asked, "Are you teaching well?" Ru Liang nodded again and said, "It's just as slow and makes people impatient." She said, "Then there's nothing he can do. The level of students is not uniform, and some people can't catch up." Liang said, "Teaching with a class is not as good as having a private teacher." She propped her head on her hand, flipped through the book at random, and asked, "Where did you study?" Turning to the first page, she read out his name and said, "Pen Ru Liang. My name is Kingxia Ralphsevich." She picked up the pen to write on the blank, but there was no blank left. The whole painting is full of the side, her side. Ru Liang watched helplessly, unable to snatch the book away, and his face turned red. Kingxia's face also turned red, like a moth with pink wings resting on the lampshade, reflecting the slightest flickering red on her face. She quickly closed the book with a casual look, found a space on the cover and wrote her name to him. Liang asked, "Have you always lived in Shanghai?" Kingxia said. "When I was a child, I was in Harbin. I have forgotten all the Chinese I spoke before." Liang said, "The body is broken. The bones are broken. And the bones are broken. And the bones are pulled out and mixed with oil. If you are willing to teach me, we can exchange it and I will teach you German." Ru Liang smiled and said, "Ao Fengyi," said silently. The school bell rang loudly. Ru Liang stood up and took the book. Kingxia put her hand on the book, pushed it towards him, and said with a smile, "This way, if you are free tomorrow noon. We can try a lesson. You come to see me at Yidong Foreign Trade Co., Limited, on the 9th floor of Susheng Building. I work there during the day. No one was there during lunch. Ru Liang nodded and said, Sushang Building. Yidong Foreign Company. I will definitely come. The two of them said goodbye now. Ru Liang didn't fall asleep until very late that night. This Qingxia. She misunderstood, thinking that he fell in love with her secretly, and that he was just drawing pictures of her face behind her back. She thought he loved her, and she so obviously gave him a chance to get close to her. Why? Could it be that she is a capable girl who works in a foreign trade company during the day and has a part-time job in night school? At most, she is only his sister's age. She is not like his sister. It is said that if a well-behaved woman knows that someone likes her, unless she plans to marry that person, she should stay away from him. This is true in China and also in foreign countries. But who doesn't like to associate with people who like themselves? Does she have to associate with people who don't like her? Qingxia may not have any other intention. Don't misunderstand him. He misunderstood just like she did. Don't make the same mistake again and again. Is it really a misunderstanding? Maybe he loved her and he didn't suspect it. She knew it first. Women are said to be more sensitive. This thing is really a bit strange. He never believed in fate, but this thing is indeed a bit strange. The next day, Ru Liang put on his best suit and felt that it was a bit silly to go to the appointment with such a brand new look. He deliberately wanted to look careless, so he temporarily added an old and discolored scarf. Go into school early in the morning. The leaves of the small trees in winter are like colloidal golden beads. He was riding a bicycle facing the sun, with his skull back hanging on the front of the bicycle, and a T-shaped withered bone refined with potion tied to the plywood at the rear of the bicycle. There was a time when this was a person's leg, and he might even be able to ride a bicycle. Ru Liang rode in front of the sun. The cold wind blew to warm him up. The sun of the living could not shine on the dead. Ru Liang put his hand on the speeding tram, follow the train and run. Looking through the car window, I saw the women sitting inside, chattering to each other, exchanging a few words and nodding, their dark eyelashes turning white in the sun. Face to face, I don't know what interesting stories to say. And they are fluttering their white eyelashes in the sun. The sun of the living cannot shine on the dead. Ru Liang's stomach was full of hot breakfast, and his heart was filled with happiness. Such unreasonable happiness is common for him, but today he thought it must be for Qingxia. The dogs in the field barked. The bell is ringing in the school. A small string of golden bells hangs out of thin air on a sunny day. Qingxia's long yellow hair, each curl is like a bell. Lovely Qingxia. He didn't go to the last class before noon, and rushed home to change his scarf, because after much thought, the new white wool scarf was more appropriate. On the way, we passed a gorgeous newly built bungalow in the deserted area. I didn't expect that Shaoxing Opera was also singing on the radio here. From the red silk curtains, a broad, expressionless voice sang 18 doo-doo. The end of culture. The mistress of such a beautiful environment is just like his mother. Ru Liang doesn't want a woman like his mother. Qingxia at least belongs to another world. Ru Liang grouped her with everything clean and lovely, like scholarships, football matches, German brand bicycles, and new literature. Although Ru Liang studied medicine, he was extremely interested in literature and art. He believes that if he were not so busy and drank more coffee, he would be able to write moving articles. His belief in coffee is not because of the aroma of coffee, but because of the complex structure of the scientific silver pot and the shiny glass lid. Similarly, half of the reason why he devoted himself to medicine was because all the doctor's instruments were brand new and shiny. They were taken out of the leather bag one by one. They were cold metal products, small and versatile. The greatest thing is the electrotherapy device. The delicate gears are turning diligently, and the sparks are flying out of the jazz music, which is light, bright, and healthy. Modern science is the only undeniably good thing in this very imperfect world. The doctor put on the dust-free white coat, the father who fried peanuts and drank wine, the mother who listened to Shaoxing opera, and the vulgar sisters were all inaccessible. This is the future Ru Liang is looking forward to. Now there is Qingxia added to the future. Ru Liang knew that to realize his ideal, he had to go through a lot of struggle. It took him 7 years to graduate from the medical school, and he was still young. Halfway through, He got involved with a Russian girl, and it didn't seem right no matter how he looked at her. The bicycle passed by a mansion where Shaoxing opera was being sung, and the radio continued to sing. There was no day or night in the wide and flat voice, as if electric lights were lit in the daytime room. Dizzy, lively, and unreal. The girl from Shaoxing sang, "The more I think about it, the more I regret it," with a steady beat. Ruling suddenly realized, the world of Shaoxing opera listeners is a stable world. The one who is unstable is himself. Your conscience is in turmoil. When I arrived at Susheng building on the Bund, I was still a little anxious, but I was worried about something else. If she arrived too early, wouldn't she be embarrassed if everyone in her office hadn't left yet? Everyone was gone, and they were all embarrassed. He waited for a while before taking the elevator upstairs. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Kingxia sitting alone in front of a desk by the window. He was startled for a moment. She seemed to be a little different from the person in his memory. In fact, Tonggang only met her yesterday, so there is no way to recall her. The time is short, but the lovesickness is long. He thinks too much and loses the truth. What he saw now was a pretty ordinary girl with yellow hair, one layer darker and one layer lighter, and the part near the scalp was greasy chestnut. She probably had just finished her light lunch. When she saw him coming, she balled up a paper bag and threw it into the wastebasket. While she was talking to him, she was always worried about whether there were crumbs on her lipstick, and kept wiping the corners of her mouth with her handkerchief. Be cautious, but also afraid of wiping lipstick beyond the boundary. One of her feet hidden under the desk was only wearing flesh-colored stockings, and she took off her high heels because they were more comfortable. Ruling sat opposite her, kicking either her shoes or her feet, as if she had several pairs of feet. He felt troubled, but immediately blamed himself. Why was he unhappy with her? Because she took off her shoes in front of others. Sitting in front of the typewriter all day long, her feet should be numb, so I don't blame her for feeling loose. She was a flesh and blood person, not some ethereal dream he had dreamed up. The rose-purple velvet sweater she was wearing was a velvet sweater for her heartbeat. He saw her heartbeat, and he felt his heartbeat. He decided not to speak to her in English from now on. His pronunciation wasn't good enough, not to give her a bad impression. When he learns German and she learns Chinese, we can talk freely. At present, I can only rely on the dialogue in the textbook. Are horses more expensive than cattle? Sheep are more useful than dogs. New ones are more beautiful than old ones. Mice are smaller, flies are even smaller. Birds and flies fly. Birds are better than old ones. People are fast. Light is faster than anything. There is nothing faster than light. The sun is hotter than anything. There is nothing hotter than the sun. December is the coldest month. It is a pity that his words of wisdom cannot be expressed in a concise way. Chao ni kong ming jun, maybe it will be sunny. Ao fei yan li jia quo lu he jun, maybe it will rain. The authors of the conversation books are all elderly, solemn and instructive. Do you smoke in Australia? Not a big draw. Do you drink in Australia? Don't drink it every day. Don't you like playing cards? No, I don't like gambling the most. Do you love hunting? I like sports the most. Ao sui di Thor pistol dispatch wang sui. Ao base. The building is fat and the grass is sent to the ground. Scar. Obedient. Bad words are not listened to. Ruliang spent the whole day turning these words around and piecing them together, but he couldn't create any hint of tenderness. Kingxia was not trapped by the textbook like him. Although her Chinese is not good, she has a determined purpose and is not afraid of embarrassment. She just says what she says. Lacking information for conversation, she told him about the situation at home. Her mother was a remarried widow, and Laufschewitz was her stepfather's surname. She also has a sister named Lydia. Her stepfather also worked in a foreign trade company, and his salary was not enough to support the family, so he was in a very embarrassing situation. Her vocabulary is limited and her sentence formation is awkward, so her words are often the most blunt and unvarnished reality. One day, she mentioned her sister. Lydia is very worried. Ruliang asked, "Why?" Kingxia said, "Because of marriage." Ruliang said in shock, "Lydia is already married." Already? Kingxia said. Because she hasn't yet. There are very few good Russians in Shanghai. There are fewer British and less American people. It's gone now, Germans can only marry Germans. Yu Liang was silent for a while, then said, but Lijiao is still young. She needn't worry. Qinjia shrugged slightly and said, yes. She is still young. Ru Liang understands Kingxia better now. He is not willing to understand her, because after understanding her, his dream will not come true. Sometimes, when they had extra time after class, he invited her out for lunch. Dining with her was a very ordinary thing. The most stressful moment was when paying the bill, because he didn't know exactly how much he should give. Sometimes he would buy a box of snacks and bring them over, and she would spread out the book to use as a plate. Sprinkle sugar and walnut crumbs on the book, and then close the book without caring. He didn't like her sloppy temper, but he tried his best to ignore it. He singled out the more poetic parts of her body to pay attention to and reminisce about. He knew that he was not in love with Kingxia. He is in love for the sake of falling in love. He looked up love and marriage in the German dictionary, and secretly learned to say, Kingxia, I love you. Will you marry me? He didn't say it out loud, but those two sentences always on the tip of his tongue if someone is not careful. There is no guarantee that he will not say those fatal words, fatal, and it will lead to his own life. And he also understands this. A reckless marriage can easily ruin his life. However, just thinking about it is exciting enough. When she heard this, no matter whether she agreed or not, she still felt excited. If she agrees, there will definitely be an earth-shattering uproar in his family, even though he has always been an insignificant person. Spring is coming. Even the textbook says, spring is the most beautiful season of the year. One evening, because of the light rain, he took the tram home from school instead of riding his bicycle. In the car, he flipped through the German textbook that he always kept with him. The book says, pull out the ye, carve and stir-fry the title of the me. Leisurely swan base teeth and get dressed and wash your face. After washing your face, take a walk, eat after returning from a walk. Then read the newspaper, then work. Stop working at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and go exercise. I take a shower at about 6 o'clock every day and have dinner at 7 o'clock. Went to see friends in the evening. I go to bed at 10 o'clock most nights. Have a good rest and work hard the next day. On the most standard day, dressing and washing your face are for personal dignity. Reading newspapers and absorbing government propaganda is a duty to the country. Work is a duty to the family. Seeing friends is an extracurricular activity and counts for points. Eating, walking, exercising, and sleeping are all necessary to maintain work efficiency. Taking a bath seems to be unnecessary for those who have a wife. It is probably for the wife's sake, right? This timetable may seem ideal, but in fact, even though most people who start a family and start a business cannot abide by it, it is not too far off the mark. Ru Liang knew that his condemnation of his father was also because the old man did not pay much attention to decency. The son has the right to interfere with him. And naturally, there is his wife and society above him. There is this sentence in the textbook. Why is it so slow? Why is it so urgent? I asked you to go. Why don't you go? I asked you to come. Why don't you just come? Why do you hit people? Why are you scolding others? Why don't you listen to me? Why not do what we do? Why are you so unruly? For what reason is it so unfair? So there is another weak application in the textbook. Is it possible to pull out the ants and hide them with all your heart? I want to go back early today. Okay. So the textbook warned himself sadly, no matter what you do, you can't be careless. No matter what happens, you can never say what you want. Yu Liang put his hand on the book, looked up, and saw 3 big words on the movie billboard outside the drizzling car window. Free Soul. Ru Liang has been in a daze since then. The tram rolled from Maho Road to Awenyi Road. There are 2 willow trees on Awenyi Road that are blowing out their golden leaves. The gray wall was half wet. The rain stopped. The sky at dusk is moist and vast, but the sky for young people is boundless, and their hearts fly far away. But people are only very timid. The world is so big. They must find some kind of snare to tie them down. Only young people are free. As we get older, we fall into the quagmire of habits inch by inch. Not getting married, not having children, and avoiding a fixed life are useless. Lonely people have their own quagmire. Only young people are free. As soon as they gain knowledge, they first realize that their freedom is a rare thing, and they cannot hold on to it. Just because freedom is precious, it seems to be hot to the touch. A free person kowtows everywhere and begs others to accept his freedom. Ruling saw this layer for the first time. He immediately gave up the idea of proposing to Kingxia. He would like to be younger for a few more years. He couldn't learn German from her anymore. It was too dangerous. He prepared a speech to explain to her. At noon that day, he went to her office as usual. As soon as the door opened, she happened to come out wearing a hat and carrying a purse, and she almost bumped into him. Kingxia groaned, put her hand on her mouth and said, "Look at my memory. I wanted to call you to tell you not to come, but I was so confused that I forgot about it. Today I plan to go out to buy something during lunch, and let's take a day off." Ruling walked out with her, and she went to a nearby clothing store to look at some pajamas, dressing gowns, and slippers and inquire about the prices. Displayed in the cafe window was a 3-tiered wedding cake with a price tag of 1,050. She stopped to look, bit her nails, and walked forward again. After walking for a while, Xiang Ruliang smiled and said, "You know, I'm getting married." Ruliang just looked at her, speechless. Kingxia smiled and said, "Congratulations." Ruliang just looked at her, not knowing whether he was relieved or simply terrified. Kingxia smiled and said, "Congratulations. It's clearly in the book. Have you forgotten?" Ruliang smiled and said, "Congratulations." Kingxia said, "I quit everything in the foreign trade business and the night school. Now, our books have to be put aside for a while. From now on," Ruliang said hurriedly. "Of course, we will talk about it later," Kingxia said. "Anyway, you know my phone number," Ruliang said. "That is your mother's house. Where will you live after you get married?" Kingxia was very surprised. He said quickly, "He moved into our house. It's temporary. It's really hard to find a house now." Ruliang nodded and said yes. They walked past a store with a window mostly covered in green paint. Kingxia looked straight ahead. His familiar profile stood out against the strong and dramatic green background. It was extremely clear, as if his face was a little red, but there was no joy. Ruliang said, "Tell me what kind of person he is." Kingxia's big, clear eyes couldn't hide any thoughts. With a defensive and alert look, she replied, "He works in the police station of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce Bureau. We have been together since childhood." Ruliang said, "He is Russian." Kingxia nodded. Ruliang smiled and said, "He must be very beautiful." Kingxia smiled and said, "Very beautiful. You can see him on the wedding day. You must come." It seemed like the most natural thing in the world, a young and beautiful Russian junior inspector who had been with her since childhood. But Ruliang knew, if she had a better chance, she would never marry him. Ruliang himself is stupid enough, falling in love for the sake of falling in love. Could it be that the woman he loved actually did something even more irreversible, getting married for the sake of getting married? He hadn't received the invitation for a long time, thinking that she must have forgotten to send it to him. But after all, it was sent, at the end of June. Why the delay? Is it financial difficulties, or is she just undecided? He decided to eat her wedding wine and got drunk. It did not occur to him that there would be no wine to eat. The pointed dome of the Russian chapel, in the mist-like drizzle, looked like light green garlic soaked in vinegar in a glass vat. There were not many people in the chapel, but it was filled with the smell of leather shoes on rainy days. The priest was draped in a cloak like a flat gold satin table rug. His long hair reached his shoulders and was connected to his golden beard. He was sweating constantly, and the bottom of his beard was soaked layer by layer. He was a tall, handsome Russian, but his face was red and swollen from drinking. He is an alcoholic and is spoiled by women. He was so sleepy that he couldn't keep his eyes open. Standing next to the priest was the choir leader, who looked and dressed like the priest, but was shorter in stature but had a big throat. He sang and screamed fiercely, sweating profusely on his forehead. and his hair was stripped off due to the heat. An incense vendor quietly walked out from behind the altar, holding a tray. He was a linen and black Chinese man. Under the monk's black robe, white bamboo trousers were exposed, and his bare feet were wearing shoes. He also has long black hair, draped in a herringbone style on his cheeks, like a ghost. Not the ghost in Liao Zai, but the ghost in the cemetery, with white ants crawling in and out. He first brought out a cup of wine, and then 2 imperial crowns. 2 grown-up men were pre-selected among relatives and friends to hold the imperial crown high, keeping an inch away from the bride and groom's heads. In that dark, smelly chapel, the priest continued to chant, and the choir continued to sing. The groom seemed embarrassed. He is an impetuous young man with yellow hair. Although he has a classic straight nose, he does not look like he has much potential. He only wore a homely, half-worn white suit. The bride was wearing a grand white satin dress. The 2 old ladies beside Ru Liang, one said that the bride's dress was rented, and the other insisted that it was borrowed, whispered to each other for a long time. Ru Liang can't help but admire Qingxia, and therefore admire all women. In the entire wedding ceremony, only Qingxia was beautiful. She seemed determined to create some beautiful memories for herself. She held a white candle and lowered her head devoutly. The upper half of her face was in the shadow of the veil, and the lower half of her face was in the shadow of the candlelight. Her faint and pale smile appeared in the swaying light and shadow. She herself created the atmosphere of mystery and dignity that a newlywed bride should have, even though the priest was listless, even though the incense burner was surprisingly dirty, even though the groom was impatient, even though her dress was rented or borrowed of. She only had one day like this in her life, so she had to have something worth remembering so that she could remember it in her old age. Ru Liang felt sad for a while and his eyes became wet. After the ceremony, men, women, old and young crowded forward, kissed the bride and groom one by one, and then dispersed. Only a few relatives were invited to their homes for tea parties. Ru Liang stood far away, stunned for a while. He couldn't kiss her, or shake her hand. He was afraid he would burst into tears. He just slipped away. 2 months later, Qingxia called him and asked him to find a small job for her, teaching English, German, Russian, or typing, because she was bored at home. He knew she didn't have enough money. After a while, one of his classmates wanted to take English lessons. He called Qingxia to inform her, but she was sick, very sick. After hesitating for a day and a night, he decided to take the liberty of going to see her once. He knew clearly that they would not let a stranger enter her bedroom, but it was just a small effort. It so happened that her sister Lydia was the only one at home that day. She was a carefree and casual girl who looked exactly like her, except that she had put too much baking powder and her hair was staggered and not as neat as hers. Lydia led him to her room and said, "It's typhoid fever. The doctor said yesterday that the difficulty is over. The risk is high." On the small cabinet beside her bed is a photo of her and her husband, because the photo was taken from the front. Her husband's classically beautiful straight nose cannot be seen. The house smelled of Russians. Qingxia looked over at her with half-open eyes on the pillow. Her indifference to everything in the world turned her light blue eyes colorless. She closed her eyes and turned her head. Her chin and neck were extremely thin, like candied dates that had been sucked away until the core was left, with only a bit of furry flesh on the core. But her profile is still there, not much changed. Ru Liang drew it very skillfully and smoothly, from the line from the corner of her forehead to her chin. Ru Liang no longer draws little figures on the top of his books. His books are always clean now. January 1944.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.